Hello and thanks for joining us on this WTTW News Special. I'm Nick Blumberg. Brandis Friedman is on assignment. Tonight, our focus is safety on public transit, specifically what's behind crime on the CTA and some of the efforts to address it. We'll get to that in just a moment, but first off tonight, police have charged a 26-year-old man in the killing of Officer John Bartholomew and critically wounding his partner in a hospital shooting over the weekend. Alfonso Talley is now facing 20 felony charges, including first-degree murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and more. Today, officers of the 17th District hung purple ribbon outside the building in memory of Bartholomew, who had 10 years on the police force. The incident happened Saturday at Endeavour Health Swedish Hospital in the Lincoln Square community. Talley was brought to the hospital by police officers to receive treatment while in custody. It's not clear how he was able to get a gun and open fire before fleeing the hospital. The other victim is a 57-year-old officer with 21 years of service. Police say he is still in critical condition. Talley's court appearance today was continued until Thursday. The federal appeals court says former House Speaker Michael Madigan will remain in prison to serve the rest of his sentence. Madigan had appealed to the Seventh Circuit, arguing his prosecution had, quote, pushed the federal bribery law over the boundaries set by the Supreme Court. He was sentenced to 7.5 years last summer after his convictions on bribery, conspiracy, and wire fraud charges. The court's ruling comes days after it ordered for two former ComEd officials who were convicted of conspiring to bribe Madigan to earn his backing on critical energy legislation. The city's new watchdog could be the man hired to clean up ComEd in the wake of scandal. Mayor Brandon Johnson has tapped David Glockner to replace Deborah Witzberg as the new Inspector General. Witzberg left office Friday. Glockner is a former federal prosecutor who spent nearly 25 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office of the Northern District, and he worked for ComEd parent company Exelon from 2020 to 2025, overseeing the company's efforts to comply with the deferred prosecution agreement, resulting from that scandal that sent former House Speaker Michael Madigan to federal prison. Glockner still needs to be confirmed by City Council. The Trump administration says its immigration enforcement operation in Illinois, known as Midway Blitz, was named in honor of a 20-year-old college student killed by an undocumented drunk driver. But today, her mother tells an Illinois commission that her daughter would have hated the association.
Having my daughter's legacy associated with this violent government operation and their political agenda, instead of the light and positivity that she contributed to this world, is inexcusable, and she would have wanted nothing to do with it.
Denise Lawrence testified as part of a two-day hearing for the Illinois Accountability Commission, which also included extensive and graphic videos showing numerous violent arrests and detentions carried out by federal agents during the operation last fall. Governor J.B. Pritzker created the commission back in October to make a, quote, public record of abuses. The group has spent the last several months collecting evidence and witness testimony and is set to issue its final report later this week. Local groups say as many as 150,000 Illinoisans could stand to lose their SNAP benefits this week under new eligibility rules and cuts made in last year's One Big Beautiful Bill. And the Greater Chicago Food Depository notes that those cuts won't only impact recipients of food benefits, but also the grocery stores where they spend those benefits.
Being able to have people at the register working and having employment here at Living Fresh, and the role that cuts back a third of our revenues weekly, daily. That means, like she mentioned, cutbacks on employees. That means making sure that, we have concerns about making sure that we pay our suppliers on time.
Melody Winston says her store, Living Fresh Market in Forest Park, is the largest black-owned grocery store in the country. She says losing revenue from SNAP sales means many small retailers may be faced with having to raise prices, cut staff, or even close their doors. The Food Depository says they fear another 100,000 people could also lose their benefits over the next year. The new SNAP work requirements take effect May 1st. Up next, the prevalence of crime on public transit and what's being done about it. That's right after this.
WTTW News coverage of policing and police reform is supported by the Joyce Foundation.
Violent crime on the Chicago Transit Authority's trains and buses is up from last year. That's despite efforts from the Chicago Police Department and the CTA to curb violence through private security and an increased police presence. Now, community organizations, local leaders, and institutions like the state's attorney's office are weighing additional ways to keep riders safe, all while the Trump administration threatens to cut federal funding to the city's transit system. Joining us to discuss the issue are Yvette Loizon, the Chief Assistant State's Attorney for Police and External Affairs at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, W. Robert Schultz III, a campaign organizer for the Active Transportation Alliance, Kate Lowe, an urban planning and policy professor at the University of Illinois Chicago, and Joseph Schwieterman, a professor at DePaul University specializing in public policy and transportation. We also invited the Chicago Transit Authority and the Chicago Police Department to join us, but they both declined. We thank the four of you for joining us for this conversation. So according to Chicago Police Department statistics, year to date, 40 aggravated assaults on the CTA in 26 compared with 47 during the same time last year, as well as 79 aggravated batteries this year compared with 67 during last year's time period. So an increase there. I'd like to get your reactions to some of these numbers and what you think may be driving them. Robert Schultz, if I could start with you, please.
Yeah, I think, you know, people are encountering different problems and issues, and they react to those problems and issues in various ways, and sometimes they're antisocial and criminal. And what we as advocates want to know about is when and where those crimes are happening, so that we can better craft responses and look behind the numbers. And that's why one of the things that we advocate for is transit ambassadors to help keep an eye on the system and work with passengers and the CTA staff. Yeah.
Yvette Loizon, what do you make of that issue on the violence on the CTA?
Well, it's something that we have seen consistently over the years, and while violent crime throughout our city has decreased significantly, CTA crime is one area where we consistently see violent crime go up, and that was a big source of concern to the state's attorney's office, and we've implemented several initiatives to address that issue.
Yeah, and I want to dig into some of those coming up. Kate Lowe, your take on sort of this issue of violent incidents on the CTA right now.
So, of course, every incident is regrettable and should be taken seriously. But I want to just think about some of the points Robert made about kind of the root causes of violence. Sometimes we want the CTA to solve really big picture problems, whether they're unhoused folks who need mental health care, or structural drivers of violence like disinvestment. So I'm excited by some of the pilot programs that are being rolled out, such as crisis intervention on the CTA and transit ambassadors. So of course it's very concerning, but CTA is embedded in a city that has a lot of issues we still need to grapple with.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe Schwieterman, your take on the issue.
Yeah, Professor Lowe makes some really good points. I think what the reason this is getting so much attention is, we had the Tribune analysis about a month or two ago showing that we're actually higher than other cities. So while New York, Boston, LA have seen those rates come down, ours have actually increased as a rate of per 100,000 passengers. So I think what that's done is, a lot of cities are still seeing, it's a long time since the pandemic, but they're still seeing that gradual comeback in rail, heavy rail, metro ridership. And we've kind of plateaued. And I think this crime issue is really at the root of that. So it threatens so many things we want to see in Chicago right now.
Yeah. Yvette Loizon, you mentioned some of the initiatives undertaken by Cook County State's Attorney Eileen O'Neill Burke. One of those, the creation of a Chicago Transit Authority task force. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what it's meant to accomplish?
Yes. So the task force is comprised of state's attorneys from all across the office, all who have specialties in different disciplines. The idea is that we will have those state's attorneys specially trained so that they know all of the information that they need to effectively and efficiently prosecute CTA crime. CTA has various technologies that they use We have very strident discovery obligations, so it's important that the state's attorneys that are assigned to that task force are able to get that information, use it quickly and effectively, and make sure that they are bringing forth very strong prosecutions, and that was the goal of the task force.
Yes, I can imagine. You mentioned CTA as well as I'm sure CPD, that there must be a lot of collaboration involved there.
There is a lot of collaboration. It's very important that we are consistently communicating and collaborating with our partners at CTA, CPD, and all of our other local, state, and federal law enforcement partners. The more resources we put towards this issue, the better of a chance we have at being successful at getting those numbers to come down.
Kate Lowe, just last week, the CTA fired its private security force of about 250 unarmed guards. What did you make of the decision to terminate that contract?
So that's something I struggled with. I understand the CTA and the agencies are trying to be responsive to concerns by riders and operators who want to feel safe. Some of the private contractors, there were questions about efficacy. I know one of them also had a kind of troubled record with some violent incidents. So I would like to see a different approach, which is more frequency and a positive feedback. Joe mentioned kind of normalizing crime by ridership. One thing that makes people feel safer is increased frequency. So I think that needs to be part of the conversation about increasing a feeling of safety is more frequent service, not just kind of what the default in the U.S. is, which is policing.
Robert Schultz, you've said before that these sort of private guards aren't necessarily the best approach to tackling violence. Maybe more of a focus on things like mental health specialists, social workers. And we should note CTA does have outreach teams on the red and blue lines helping connect folks with social services. Why do you think that's an important approach?
It's very important because people have different types of reactions to different situations, and sometimes unhoused or mental illness or seeing people withdraw, or I've actually seen people shoot up on CTA. So seeing those things make people unsafe, as well as the assaults and more serious types of things. So that's one of the reasons why we want to lean into some transit ambassadors, people that get to know the system. And also the other thing that needs to happen, I always emphasize there's a gap between a lot of policing and doing nothing.
Right.
And within that gap, there's a lot of tools. And one of the things that society needs to do, and this is just not Chicago, is scale up our response to the unhoused, mental illness, and substance abuse. Yes, we respond to those issues, but it's not sufficient and it's not up to the scale of the need.
Yeah, and addressing, as you said, some of those root causes. We mentioned briefly technology earlier. Joe Schwieterman, do you think there are sort of technological approaches transit agencies like CTA should be employing? For example, CTA's got this gun detection surveillance program, things like that.
The technology is sort of our friend here. And you can see Los Angeles experimented with an app called Transit Watch for people who see an unwelcome behavior or crime, can do a real-time report of that, which both allows, security to be mobilized, but also gives us data. And I think right now, one of the problems is if you see a crime, you're sort of encouraged to get up and pick up the emergency phone in the car, the train car. And that's somewhat of a very visible, scary act if you're seeing something to be seen as the one who's, calling the police, so to speak. So you can envision apps for that. Of course, security cameras, the rate of apprehension for violent crimes has really fallen. I think I saw a number, it's close to 1 in 4 or so on the CTA. And, I think with that kind of technology, we should be able to get that rate up. And hopefully with the new funding coming in June and afterwards, that's going to be a big push.
Absolutely. And we should note CTA does say that its chatbot system can be used to report these incidents, although certainly not every rider necessarily knows that. Yvette Lauzon, last December, just a horrific attack on a CTA train left one person burned after they were set on fire. The suspect in this case had been arrested, dozens of times, previously involved in CTA-related crimes, according to prosecutors. What sorts of work can the state's attorney's office and your partners do to prevent repeat offenders from, committing crimes on CTA in an incident like this?
Well, we have a couple different approaches. One is we want to make sure that if people commit violent crimes on the CTA, our state's attorneys are stepping up in court, recounting all that information to the court and seeking detention. And that's important because when a person is detained pre-trial, by definition, we are prohibiting them from repeating crimes during the course of their case. Secondarily, we did create the task force for that reason as well. Having the task force make sure that we are putting forth the most effective prosecution we can so that we are getting convictions on individuals who are committing violent crime and need to be held accountable. And I think it's important that we are putting resources towards that in such a directed fashion.
Yeah. After that incident, Trump administration threatened to withhold some $50 million in federal funding to the CTA if the agency didn't create a new safety framework. Joe Schwieterman, what could that loss in funding mean to the CTA's violence prevention efforts?
Well, the CTA is indeed at a very tricky spot because they're planning a very costly red line extension, going south to serve neighborhoods that are underserved. And boy, you just see that investment being compromised if the security of the system doesn't increase or people feel more comfortable riding late night, all hours and so forth, and including the red line purple modernization, that so much of that investment is lost without that feeling that people are going to opt for the train when they're traveling alone or feel scared. So this really our whole plan to better integrate our transit system and so forth is prerequisite to fixing that problem is making people feel safe. And I think the good news is the CTA gets this now, as we've been saying, a lot of efforts with social service agencies, with DCFS, with new experimentation with armed and unarmed officers. They're trying things now that we didn't see a couple of years ago. That's encouraging. What would be better, though, is to see some, of course, trends moving in the right direction.
Right. Kate Lowe, as part of that updated safety plan, the CTA announced increased police patrols on train and bus lines, including some bus ride-alongs, which many operators have asked for, in recent years. What's your reaction to that increased presence?
So one thing I want to recognize is that my perspective on the potential of police impact might be different than those of the operators. And I want to recognize the CTA for listening to their operators and riders. Personally, as a rider, I'd rather see a full train car than an empty train car with the police. So I think it's important to listen to the operators on the front lines. But I would like to see more funding go to service enhancements relative to the policing budget.
Yeah, certainly we hear, even from the CTA itself, that more frequent trains and buses and more riders make for a safer experience for everyone. Robert Schultz, when you talk to transit riders about safety issues, what sorts of concerns do they bring up? What do you hear from them?
There's a whole range of concerns. Safety begins the moment you leave your house and whether you can even get across the street, like Cicero Avenue or North Avenue, that are dangerous intersections. If your bus stop is on the other side of the street, that poses a risk, and that goes into your calculus. Then I think it's an important development that we're going to see the bus operators with cameras on their persons. Mm-hmm. Every bus has approximately 11 cameras already, inside and outside, but I think that would be an extra enhancement, and bus operators will feel more safe. So there's things that we can do that are technical, there's things that we can do that are legal, and then there's things that we can do out of social science and sociology. But the most important thing, I think, is delivering on service. And part of that is like at a bus stop. If it's just a pole, it's just you and the world. If there's a shelter where you can sit that's lighted and perhaps even has a panic button or some way to communicate with an authority like you see on college campuses, those are service delivery things that are within CTA's realm that they could do to enhance safety.
You know, Yvette, the transit funding and reform bill passed last year, creating the new Northern Illinois Transit Authority, overseeing not just CTA, also Metro and Pace. It includes, among other things, a new law enforcement task force that'll be led by the Cook County Sheriff's Office. Are you hopeful that could, you know, sort of improve some of these issues around public safety on transit?
Absolutely. I think whenever law enforcement is working with all of the partners that are impacted by whatever the issue is, we always have a better opportunity of addressing problems head on and more comprehensively. And to some of the points that have been made by the other people on the panels, prosecuting violent offenders is one option, but there are other options that the state's attorney's office has implemented as well. For example, when a person appears in first appearance court and they may not have committed a violent crime and we aren't seeking detention on that case, we have been requesting conditions for their pretrial release to make sure that they are not returning to the locations where they may have committed that crime. Preventing that hopefully will deter future criminal activity, and it also makes the people who've been impacted and victimized by that crime feel safer. That's our goal. Yeah.
You know, the bill also creates a transit ambassador program, which many advocates have long called for. Joe Schwieterman, your reaction to that provision?
Well, certainly, and I think, you know, that's a low-cost way. And my view is that, you know, the scale of our system, that uniformed police officers, while they're that great and a critical part, that's so expensive compared to just eyes on trains and buses everywhere. And I think one of the good news about our system is, you know, the Metro system is seen as safe. Even the CTA buses have a higher level of, you know, consumer sense of security than the CTA trains. So it's, you know, our problems are heavily focused on the CTA rail. And that's where those ambassadors can really make a difference. They can de-escalate. They can give people confidence, some of those half-empty trains, that there's somebody watching. And it can be done quickly at a fraction of the cost of those uniform officers.
Yeah. You know, Robert Schultz, even with all these efforts, even with the new focus on this, can it be difficult sometimes to change the perception that folks have that CTA may not be safe?
Yeah, that's a real tricky thing. You know, safety is a function of perceptions. And so when you hear these high-level headlines, people react to them in different ways. But when you look at the statistics, the average person out there taking a CTA ride is generally going to be safe. And I think one of the things that's going to help advocates is knowing where some of these incidents are happening and how we can respond to them. One thing I see in my travels is at one occasion, there was a half dozen private security and a couple law enforcement people at a major station at 9 a.m. in the morning. That's not when the danger is for the average rider. It's at 2 a.m. in the morning coming back from a concert, and you're boarding the L at Harrison Station where the lighting is poor and there's very few people around.
Yeah. We've got just about 30 seconds left, but, you know, Yvette, obviously there are so many factors that go into crime, mental health, economic conditions, you know, beyond sort of specifically focusing on CTA. Are there things you think that, you know, city leaders should do to help reduce crime on the CTA and elsewhere?
I think we have to keep the general public educated about what is going on and how they can protect themselves. We had our community engagement people at various CTA stations last week to do just that. And I think when we are open and accessible and listening to commuters, we have a good chance of being successful in not only the reality of safety, but the perception of safety as well.
All right, it's a big topic, but you all helped us break it down. That's all the time we've got. W. Robert Schultz III, Yvette Loizon, Kate Lowe, and Joseph Schwieterman, thank you all very much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family. the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Be sure to sign up for our free email newsletters, The Daily Chicagoan and Urban Nature, at WTTW.com/newsletter. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm with more than 40 years of experience in medical malpractice.